The scandal that shook Hong Kong's music industry didn't begin with a headline. It began with a sound, a voice captured behind closed doors, a conversation never meant to be heard, and a recording that slipped out of the shadows and tore open a world the public was never supposed to see. For decades, Albert Yeung, the powerful figure behind Emperor Entertainment Group, controlled the rise of Cantopop with an iron grip wrapped in velvet. EIG created icons, shaped pop culture, and built the careers of some of the most recognizable stars in Asia. But in an industry where fame sparkles on stage, the real power lives backstage, in offices, contract rooms, and private discussions where no camera is allowed. And that is exactly where the trouble began. The leaked audio didn't just expose frustration or corporate tension. It hinted at something deeper, pressure disguised as guidance, loyalty demanded instead of earned, and artists pushed into choices that served a system far larger than any individual career. Suddenly, whispers about slave contracts, manipulation, silencing tactics, and long-buried disputes resurfaced. Former artists spoke cautiously. Industry insiders closed their doors, and the public began asking one question: if these recordings surfaced, what else has never been revealed? The scandal wasn't only about what was said. It was about what the recordings implied. A power structure hidden in plain sight, a decade of quiet battles, and an empire built not just on talent, but on control. Tonight we follow the trail left by those secret recordings and uncover how they nearly fractured the most influential music powerhouse in Hong Kong, and why the truth behind them still remains dangerous. Long before any scandal exposed the shadows behind Hong Kong's music empire, Albert Yeung had already carved out a position as one of the most influential figures the entertainment world had ever seen. His rise began far from the stage lights, in the business corridors where money, connections, and strategic timing mattered more than talent. Through Emperor Group, he built a financial empire that spanned banking, real estate, jewelry, cinemas, and entertainment. But it was Emperor Entertainment Group, EEG, founded in the late 1990s, that turned him into a kingmaker. EEG wasn't just another music label, it was a factory of fame. At a time when Cantopop was searching for a new generation of stars after the legendary Four Heavenly Kings era, EEG positioned itself perfectly. With aggressive investments, sharp marketing, and near-total control over the careers they managed, EEG produced a lineup of artists who would dominate the 2000s. Joey Yeung, Twins, Nicholas Tse, and many others. They weren't simply popular, they became cultural symbols. And Albert Yeung stood behind all of it. His reputation inside the industry was unmistakable. The man who could take an unknown and turn them into a household name in a matter of months, or bury a rising star with a single decision. He controlled concert deals, brand endorsements, media access, album releases, and even the narrative artists used in interviews. Success inside EIG wasn't just encouraged, it was engineered. But with that engineering came something else, a level of control far beyond what audiences imagined. Contracts were long-term, demanding, and filled with clauses that ensured loyalty. Artists who wanted to renegotiate found themselves in endless meetings. Those who hesitated faced delays, cancellations, or sudden pauses in their careers. It wasn't just management, it was a system. Some called it protection, others called it domination. And slowly, rumors began forming about pressure behind the scenes, about careers frozen as punishment, about how stepping out of line meant stepping out of the spotlight entirely. By the early 2000s, EIG wasn't just the leading entertainment company in Hong Kong. It was the standard. Competing labels couldn't replicate its machinery. Media outlets depended on EIG's star power to survive. Award shows bent toward its artists. A network of influence, fear, admiration, and obligation circled around Albert Yeung like an invisible shield. To the public, EEG looked like a glittering success story, a powerhouse crafting the stars of a new generation. But to those inside the system, a different reality was taking shape. one where power outweighed talent, where loyalty was currency, and where decisions made behind closed doors shaped the fate of some of the biggest names in Asian music. It was within this tightly controlled ecosystem that the seeds of the recording scandal first began to grow, unnoticed by the outside world, but impossible to ignore for those trapped inside. The scandal that would eventually unravel ERG's polished facade didn't erupt from the public stage. It leaked out of quiet rooms where no one was supposed to be listening. What emerged in those recordings was not a single explosive confession, but a pattern of tone, pressure, and control that hinted at how the company operated when the cameras were off. The leaked audio came from a series of private discussions involving artist management, contract renegotiations, and internal meetings. At first, the public only heard fragments, a frustrated voice, a stern command, a reminder of who held the power. But as more snippets surfaced, a fuller picture took shape, one that many in the industry had whispered about for years. In one recording, an executive spoke bluntly about career consequences if an artist refused to renew a contract. The threat wasn't loud or dramatic. It was delivered in a calm, matter-of-fact tone that suggested this was routine. Another clip captured a conversation about restricting certain public appearances until an artist showed proper cooperation, implying that opportunities could be withheld strategically to force compliance. And then there was the most unsettling element, the emotional pressure woven into these conversations. Some recordings suggested that artists were reminded of their debts to the company. Debts of money, exposure, fame, gratitude, and loyalty. These weren't financial obligations, they were psychological ones. EEG had elevated many of its artists from obscurity to stardom, and the company used that success as leverage when negotiations became tense. None of the recordings included screaming, explicit threats, or dramatic confrontations. Instead, they revealed something far more chilling, a calm, confident certainty in the voices of those representing the company, as if the power imbalance was simply a natural part of how the industry worked. And for many years, it was. Artists under EEG were known to sign long-term contracts, some stretching a decade or more. The company controlled their schedules, media image, branding, and even aspects of their personal lives. If a star wanted time off, a relationship, a change in musical style, or a new creative direction, it required approval. Refusal could lead to subtle punishments. Delayed releases, withheld budgets, or a sudden decline in promotion. The recordings were the first time the public glimpsed the machinery that fueled EEG's dominance. Fans who had once assumed success came purely from talent now saw that star-making was a negotiation of power, where the company's priorities outweighed personal autonomy. As the clips circulated online, analysts quickly noted that the language used by executives resembled negotiation tactics found in industries far outside entertainment. Tactics designed to enforce compliance without leaving a paper trail. And while the public couldn't identify every voice in the recordings, the structure of the conversations made one thing clear. These weren't isolated incidents. They reflected a system. Several artists who had quietly left ERG in previous years were suddenly re-evaluated by fans. Old interviews were re-watched. Subtle hints of frustration, once dismissed as routine industry complaints, took on new meaning. Rumors resurfaced about stars who endured intense pressure during contract disputes, about young performers who felt trapped, and about artists whose careers stalled inexplicably after disagreements. And although none of the leaked audio directly featured Albert Yeung's voice, his influence permeated every conversation. The tone, the authority, the implied consequences all pointed back to the culture he had built. The recordings didn't reveal any single crime. They revealed a philosophy, a worldview where control was the foundation of success, where loyalty wasn't optional, where artists thrived only as long as they remained within the boundaries drawn for them, And as more people began to question whether EEG's glittering success was built on consent or coercion, the scandal grew from a leak into a reckoning, one that would soon spill into lawsuits, public confrontations, and a decade of silent battles. When the recordings began circulating online, the explosive reaction from the public was only the first wave. Inside Hong Kong's music industry, a far more complex and delicate chain reaction unfolded, one that exposed long-standing tensions between artists and the company that had shaped the Cantopop landscape for over 2 decades. For many performers tied to EEG, the recordings were not shocking. They were familiar. Some described them privately as everyday language, the kind of conversations that happened whenever an artist pushed for creative freedom, better terms, or simply more control over their own career. Now that the public had heard those tones for themselves, the power dynamic that had always been hidden suddenly became impossible to ignore. Artists who had been silent for years felt that the ground beneath them was shifting. Those still under contract stayed quiet. They had to. The stakes were too high and EEG's influence too pervasive. But those who had already left the company or whose careers had faded began speaking in carefully measured phrases during interviews. They did not accuse. They did not attack. Instead, they used words like pressure, expectations, negotiations that were one-sided, and difficult periods. The public listened closely, reading between every line. The most visible fallout appeared in the legal arena. Contract disputes that had simmered privately now resurfaced, with some artists revisiting old grievances and others attempting to renegotiate terms that once seemed untouchable. For years, whispers had circulated about EEG's long-term contracts, deals that could stretch nearly a decade, locking artists into tight schedules, revenue splits, and creative restrictions. Now, with the recordings out, many began questioning whether those agreements were built on genuine collaboration or on coercion disguised as business strategy. The lawsuits that followed were not theatrical public battles. They were quiet, technical, and protracted, lasting months, sometimes years. Some disputes centered on royalty distribution, others focused on contract termination or unpaid fees. But beneath all the legal language lay a deeper issue: the unequal leverage that artists had always faced when negotiating with companies far more powerful than themselves. And then there was the emotional fallout. Several artists close to EEG reportedly struggled under the weight of public scrutiny, afraid that speaking too honestly could jeopardize their careers. A few made brief statements online, emphasizing gratitude toward the company or distancing themselves from the scandal entirely. These posts read less like personal expressions and more like attempts to stabilize a career shaken by proximity to controversy. Industry insiders noted something else: a shift in how artists behaved behind the scenes. Newer performers became more cautious in meetings. Older artists requested legal representation more frequently. Some hesitated before signing renewals, aware that the system that once seemed unbreakable was now under a harsh spotlight. Meanwhile, Albert Yeung remained silent, but his influence echoed through every reaction. EEG executives dismissed the recordings as out-of-context clips meant to mislead. They framed the internal conversations as standard industry negotiations, a claim that did little to silence critics. The contradiction between public glamour and private tension was now too visible to ignore. The scandal did not topple EEG. It did not dismantle Albert Yeung's empire. But it did something more subtle and more dangerous. It fractured the trust that had held the artist-company relationship together. Fans who once assumed the industry was built on mentorship and opportunity now saw that behind every hit song, award show, and magazine cover were negotiations shaped by power, fear, and obligation. And for artists already contemplating leaving the company, the scandal became a turning point. The moment they realized that stepping outside the empire meant reclaiming not only their career, but their autonomy. Yet even as the fallout spread across the industry, another question grew louder. If the recordings that leaked were only fragments, what else had been said in private rooms that the public never heard? As the scandal expanded, many expected regulators, media watchdogs, or legal authorities to step in and scrutinize the leaked recordings. But what followed was not an official inquiry. It was silence. A silence so coordinated, so enduring, that it revealed far more about Hong Kong's entertainment ecosystem than any investigation ever could. The first and most obvious question was simple. Why didn't anyone step forward? Why weren't the recordings authenticated, challenged, or even publicly addressed by industry bodies? The answer lies in the unique structure of influence that companies like EEG built over decades. Emperor Group wasn't merely a music label, it was a sprawling empire whose reach extended into cinemas, media outlets, magazines, event sponsorships, and even political relationships. To many reporters, questioning EEG didn't just mean risking a story, it meant risking access to the entire entertainment pipeline. In Hong Kong's tightly interwoven entertainment circle, losing that access could cripple an entire newsroom. Behind closed doors, insiders whispered that major publications were advised to wait for clarity before running deeper investigations. But that clarity never came. Instead, the stories died quietly, buried under layers of hesitation and self-censorship. The scandal revealed another uncomfortable truth. Many of the people who could confirm the authenticity of the recordings were the same people who depended on EEG for income, exposure, or stability. Managers, producers, session musicians, choreographers, PR teams, all of them existed within a system sustained by Emperor Group's financial weight. To speak publicly would be to sever ties with the one company powerful enough to elevate or end a career instantly. Some insiders described EEG not as a company, but as an ecosystem. Leaving it meant leaving the safety of the industry's gravitational center, and for many, silence was the only survivable choice. There was also the legal dimension. Hong Kong's entertainment contracts often included strict non-disclosure clauses designed to prevent internal disputes from becoming public, and violating them could lead to crushing penalties. Even artists who had left EEG years earlier remained bound by terms that limited what they could say. One former industry employee summed it up bluntly in an anonymously quoted comment. "Even when you're no longer with them, you're still with them." Beyond that, the scandal intersected with a long-standing cultural reality. Hong Kong's entertainment world had always functioned on unspoken agreements, power networks, and loyalties that stretched back decades. The idea of publicly turning against a dominant figure like Albert Yeung was nearly unthinkable, not because people believed he was innocent, but because the social and economic risks were too great. As the public demanded answers, commentators began revisiting old disputes from the past. Artists who left suddenly, singers who struggled with contract renewals, stars whose careers dimmed after disagreements. Details that once seemed unrelated now appeared connected to a broader pattern. A pattern suggested, not proven, by the secret recordings. But despite the growing unease, the scandal never reached a breaking point. It hovered in a liminal space. Too disturbing to forget, too dangerous to pursue. Industry veterans explained that Hong Kong's entertainment system was built on balance, fragile, delicate, and maintained through silent cooperation. A full investigation into EEG's internal practices could have destabilized not only the company, but the entire Cantopop infrastructure. Labels, promoters, venues, agencies, broadcasters, all had something to lose. And so, the scandal slipped into the shadows. The recordings remained online in fragmented form, whispered about, but never fully analyzed. Lawsuits continued behind the scenes. Relationships shifted. Trust eroded. But the discussions that could have brought clarity never happened. What remained was a haunting sense that the public had only glimpsed the surface. In a world built on rehearsed performances and carefully crafted public images, the recordings were a reminder that the real story of Hong Kong's music industry wasn't written on the stage. It was hidden in rooms where no one was supposed to be listening in the first place. The leaked recordings were never just about EEG or even Albert Yeung. They were a window into a much larger, much older problem: the structural imbalance that defined Hong Kong's entertainment industry for decades. The scandal didn't expose a single abusive conversation. It exposed an entire philosophy of control that had shaped Cantopop since its golden age. At the heart of that philosophy was a simple truth: artists were not partners. They were assets. Their careers were built, guided, and protected, but also constrained, shaped, and owned by the companies that invested in them. In exchange for stardom, they surrendered a level of autonomy that few people outside the industry fully understood. EEG was simply the most visible example of this reality. But similar systems existed across Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, and later South Korea, places where music agencies functioned not merely as management firms, but as training camps, behavioral regulators, creative authorities, and financial overseers. The leaked recordings crystallized the darker side of that structure. They revealed how loyalty could be weaponized to ensure obedience, how emotional pressure could be disguised as guidance, and how an artist's entire livelihood could hinge on a single decision made in a private room. For younger artists, often signing contracts in their teens, that power dynamic was even harsher. Most came from ordinary backgrounds with few resources. Many viewed their managers as mentors, even parental figures. By the time they realized how restrictive their contracts truly were, they were already too deep into the system to walk away without losing everything they had built. The recordings also reignited a debate about slave contracts, long-term agreements with tight revenue splits, and strict behavioral clauses. While EEG wasn't the only company accused of such practices, its dominance made it the most scrutinized. Critics argued that the company's success depended not on innovation, but on control, ensuring that artists remained compliant, disciplined, and profitable. Fans, who once imagined that the music industry was a world of glamour and freedom, were confronted with a new reality. Behind every hit song and music award lay negotiations designed to keep the machine running smoothly, even at the cost of individual well-being. The scandal also highlighted the role of silence as a survival tactic. Hong Kong's entertainment culture had long operated on unwritten rules. Don't challenge the companies. Don't expose internal politics. Don't disrupt the order of the industry. These principles created a system where misconduct rarely faced public scrutiny, not because it didn't exist, but because no one could afford to speak. Reporters who pushed too aggressively risked losing access to events, interviews, and exclusive content. Artists who resisted risked being frozen out of promotions or even removed from the spotlight entirely. And smaller agencies, relying on partnerships and industry relationships, avoided any friction with giants like EIG. The scandal also forced comparisons to other Asian markets. In South Korea, legal battles over idol contracts had already pushed the industry to reform certain exploitative practices. In China, celebrity scandals often triggered sweeping industry crackdowns. But Hong Kong's music scene, now smaller and more fragile than its former golden era, lacked the momentum or pressure needed for structural change. Instead, the recordings became a symbol, a reminder of how the old system worked and how much of it probably still remained. They didn't end EEG's influence. They didn't topple Albert Yeung, but they changed the public's understanding of the industry forever. For the first time, fans questioned whether their favorite artists were truly free, whether their careers reflected their own desires or the company's strategies, and whether the songs they loved came from creativity or compliance. In the end, the scandal didn't offer a clean resolution. It left behind a lingering unease, the feeling that the most powerful stories in the music industry were not the ones performed on stage, but the ones recorded accidentally, whispered in backrooms, or kept locked away in offices where fame meets fear. And it raised a final, unsettling question. If a few leaked recordings revealed this much, how much more remains buried in the silence? The secret recordings may have surfaced only for a moment, But the questions they raised have echoed for years. They peeled back the polished surface of Hong Kong's music industry and revealed the machinery underneath. A machinery built on hierarchy, loyalty, and a level of control that most fans never realized existed. For decades, Cantopop thrived on carefully crafted images. The hardworking idol, the grateful newcomer, the loyal star who owed everything to the company that discovered them. But behind those images were contracts shaped to protect empires, not individuals. Behind every glamorous debut was a negotiation. Behind every hit song was a demand. And behind every rising star was a gatekeeper who decided what they were allowed to become. The leaked audio didn't destroy EEG, nor did it bring down Albert Yeung. That was never the point. What it did was shine a brief, uncomfortable light on how fragile the balance of power truly was, how easily an artist could be elevated or erased, and how much influence one company could wield over an entire industry. The scandal faded, but its shadow remained. Fans started listening more carefully. Artists became more cautious. Reporters learned which doors stayed closed, no matter how loudly they knocked. And the public came away with a deeper understanding of how fame is constructed, managed, and sometimes controlled with an iron hand. In the end, the recordings weren't shocking because of what they said. They were shocking because they confirmed what so many had suspected but never dared speak aloud. They reminded the world that the brightest stages often cast the darkest shadows, and that the most dangerous truths are the ones spoken when no one believes they're being heard.